individual level and the systemic level. My question is, what can both stakeholders, like our organizations and other institutions across the state, and the government do, either in partnership or individually, to address and combat both the individual level of racism that we see in society and the systemic level of racism that we see in society? How can we create more equality and better opportunities for all of our people? So I'll leave that question hanging out there. I know it's a loaded one. I know we have minutes, so I want to ask anyone on the panel to start us off, if you will.
So I've been at this for many years, for decades already. And my work and my service started with a human concept, not a particular concept, but a human concept. I was involved in the creation of the Human Relations Commissions in the 90s, which later on created a State Human Relations Council, which required legislation. I was also blessed to be in the governor's event yesterday where he talked about how New Jersey was one of the last to catch on to the ending of slavery as you look over time and decades. The faces change, but the troubles don't. 30 years later, I don't see any of the people that I worked with back in the 90s, but the structure was sound, and structures evolve as well. We are talking about the difference between what government can do and what local communities can do. The government had an Office of Biased Crimes. The government had human relations councils. They were somewhat disconnected from the local efforts of human relations commissions. And I'm not saying that today that is the structure that requires success here. But what I am here to say is that there was a sound structure there, that you take what was there and you adapt it to what is going on now, and you create what it needs to be today. That structure at the local level include a mayoral appointment, which might in itself be a concern. It required volunteers. These were not paid positions. It gathered committees in education and religion, interfaith religion, law enforcement, community action, public relations, and political relations. Let me make sure I didn't miss one here. And ethnic representation throughout the local community. There wasn't a lot of support for local human relations commissions, and you were kind of left on your own to figure that out, and certainly cultural events as well. But if you can take that model and develop it into something that has support from state government in real ways versus the volunteer efforts, you also have to have people in those commissions or in those bodies the way they look that you can count on. I'm here. I was just in a funeral last night for my foster grandson, who is the young man who was beaten to death in Burlington County last week. And I'm sitting here. So if I say to you, I need you there tomorrow, I need to know that you're going to be there. So while you look for ethnic representation and you look for perspectives of expertise in your local community, I will say that the Latino Action Network absolutely believes that power is local. When you want to affect change for your family and for your community, the state can only do so much, but communities themselves have to get together as well and stand up. So I would leave that with you, and I will say that young people have been the force of the success of every movement that I've known from the times of John Lewis and before, but they don't realize the power that they have. And that also requires us, as people who sit in this room, to educate our children and to see what they see in you. You be the examples of what we want them to be. We have rich, we have poor, we have red, we have blue, we have trouble. And all of the work that we have all been doing together still has not made this go away. So we have to think in new ways. So thank you.
Okay, so you did good. All right, so when you look at bias, you look at matters where people are treated unfairly. So let's take a look at housing. All right, we have a problem. Thank God that we have Lieutenant Governor Oliver here, who has restructured DCA somewhat. So we should be actually thanking her. And then we need to look at our municipal leaders in terms of helping out low income and people who cannot afford high rents. You know, that's pretty much understood. Secondly, let's take a look at policing. All right, so we're here because of policing. All right, and we extend our appreciation to General Placken. But on a municipal level and on county levels, we could actually look to see how effective the CCR would be, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which was initiated by the Honorable Raz Baraka, the Mayor of Newark, and the Newark Police Department is heading in the right direction under the leadership of Public Safety Director Brian O'Hara. But that's, listen, just because they're actually doing things the right way, the way they should be, with good intentions, doesn't mean people are being victimized. You just heard the gentleman indicated that 2 people died. So that needs to be addressed. So there's still work to be done. And that comes from partnerships. It really does. All the NAACPs, whether it's state conference or all the different branches, under the Criminal Justice Committee, I actually encourage them, know your law enforcement in your particular area. If you don't know them, I will help you get to know them. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're black, especially if you're Puerto Rican or Latin, especially if you're Asian, especially if you're Islamic, especially if you're gay, especially. Our courts, we have a sincere problem. We're missing judges. So if we're missing judges, that means that people are in jail when they should not be in jail. Most of those people are the same people I just mentioned. Black, Hispanic, Asian, Islamic. So that needs to be addressed, because how can we actually try to teach our communities, our societies, what's right when we're not doing anything that's right for them? Please ponder that, and thank you.
Thank you. So the other speakers, can I ask you to keep it to 30 seconds to a minute?
In terms of supporting our community with responses to individual bias incidents, at AAPI Montclair, we've really found power in community, and I mean that in a very concrete way, not just a fuzzy way. People live their lives locally. They don't live their lives at the state or national level, and when something happens, they turn to the people who are around them, who they know best. I don't often wish I were a lawyer, but when I'm trying to help people navigate the reporting options to local law enforcement, to the state's office, to the federal level, I wish I were. And it can be overwhelming. So we serve as guides and trusted messengers. We've partnered with the Division on Civil Rights on Community Education. Anything you can do to help support those efforts in your communities would be very welcome. We know things like bystander intervention trainings are very effective. Fighting bias and hate can't just be solved by the impacted communities. We need to involve our wider communities. That's something we're working on in Montclair. We can get so many people through our own networks, but of course, if law enforcement can partner with us, that would be even more powerful. And then longer term, thinking systemically, education is the key. I mean, racial prejudice starts at age 3, age 4. We have amazing curriculum mandates in New Jersey that ensure that all our stories are told. We need to realize the promise of those, from the Amistad requirement, LGBTQ and disability requirement, Holocaust, and of course now the AAPI curriculum requirement. I wouldn't send my child out into the world, unvaccinated against the diphtheria or not knowing how to read. So we can't send our children out into the world with no protections against hate and bias and not understanding the contributions that we've all made to this country. So we're thinking deeply and creatively. I think our future is more irresistible, right? We are working toward a future where we all celebrate Juneteenth, where we all celebrate Diwali and Lunar New Year, and we have amazing days where our children can see people of all cultures coming together to support them. We are going to get there because it's a much brighter, more appealing vision than hating someone, alone in front of your computer. But we need your help to think deeply and creatively about this. And I don't put pressure on myself to solve this all at once, but I do put pressure on myself to move us forward a little every day in whatever way I can. And it means a lot to know that our partners in government are doing that as well. Thank you.
So how to prevent bias incidents and crimes? Very briefly, I'd just like to mention three things. First, as everyone has agreed, to light, be shed so that darkness can be removed. I think we have to have a partnership, and for the Muslim community, I am grateful to say to you that we have built a very strong partnership with the New Jersey law enforcement, including the state police, where they have now included a 1 full-hour program on understanding Islam and Muslims. And I have been part of that for the last several years in delivering that to the state police. We are using that information also to prepare a training program for all police departments in the state. And that is being done within the Department of Homeland Security, and certainly with the support of Colonel Callahan, we've been able to work with all parts of law enforcement to make sure that we are doing that. Secondly, we have, since we learned about the U.S. Attorney's Office, the initiative against standing against hate that the U.S. Attorney spoke about, we also have invited the U.S. Department of Justice officials, including Mike Campion, who's sitting here, and the New Jersey Attorney General's office to come and meet with our community. We've already had 2 meetings, one in May, one in June. We are now working on one in South Jersey sometime later. That's a part of our community needs to know that we have to do some work, and that we need to connect with law enforcement at every level in every area. And therefore, we are encouraging everyone, as my friend Rick pointed out, that if you don't have a good relationship with your local police, I'll help you do that. And my offer to all of our communities is, no matter where you live, if you don't have a relationship with your mayor and with your police chief, please call me, and I'll make sure that that happens. So we are earnestly, working on trying to build that. 2 other things. One is, all of us say these things happen. Hate is learned, and unfortunately, it is widespread, and it's increasing. So what can we do about it? I would just like to briefly mention a pledge that came out of a conversation that I was a part of at Drew University in 2015. And it's called A Pledge to Stand Up for the Other. Some of you may have heard about it. The entire legislature of the state of New Jersey has taken it. Many Jewish federations, actually, my friends are here from various federations, have actually formally taken that pledge. And it is basically to say that if you hear hateful comments, it starts with words, right? And then, unfortunately, it can escalate to violence. So we believe that if we can stop people when they say hateful things, okay, encourage this pledge that I came up with several years ago, and as I said, we are still working on it, basically says the following. It's one sentence, and I'll stop with that. And I will ask you to please think about that. And actually, I have a pledge from the Attorney General of New Jersey to actually take it formally. We've already spoken about that. And the next request is going to be for the governor to take the pledge. Here's what it says. And the essence of this is that if, as individuals, all of us can challenge hate and bigotry wherever we see it, no matter what the source, no matter what the target, we believe we could change, we could transform society. And here's what it is. While interacting with members of my own faith, ethnic, or gender community, or with others, if I hear hateful comments from anyone about members of any other community, I pledge to stand up for the other and speak up to challenge bigotry in any form. Thank you very much.
Christian, you'll have the last word.
All right, so I'm going to do this in 30 seconds, hopefully. So here are the problems. LGBTQ community. Highest rates of unemployment are transgender women, women of color. Highest rates of unemployment. Highest rates of bullying in schools is LGBTQ youth. That's why teaching inclusive curriculum is so important despite what's happening at school boards throughout the state. There are discrimination taking place against the LGBTQ community. What can you do as government and community leaders? Look no further than folks like Assemblywoman Timberlake, who's in the room, Senator Greenstein, who's in the room, who's introducing legislation, co-sponsoring it to protect the LGBTQ community. Look at the Attorney General Platkin, who's including the LGBTQ community in conversations like today. Often the LGBTQ community doesn't get included in conversations about discrimination and hate. So, look to those folks as leaders that are doing the right thing. Look no further than the state PBA with Pat Colligan, who is the president, and David D'Amico in the law enforcement community who are helping to create liaisons all throughout the state. There are LGBTQ law enforcement liaisons because all politics are local, right? We can say whatever we want at Garden State Equality, but if in local communities there's a bad relationship between law enforcement and the LGBTQ community, a bridge will never be built there. And so, look to the state PBA, look to what David D'Amico is doing for the law enforcement community. For LGBTQ people who are listening, what can you be doing? Well, there is so much to do, right? And you can see with this administration, with Governor Murphy and his incredible team, we have, Raj and Kia who are working to always ensure that LGBTQ people are included. There's a lot of work to be done, and people are looking to LGBTQ people to be engaged in that work. So if you're ready to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work, there are so many folks in this room that are looking for you to be engaged. Garden State Equality, this organization, just like everyone up here, we can't do it alone. We need community engagement. We need everyone to step up. And I'm sure I'm well over 30 seconds now, but I appreciate Amol for being such an active listener and for getting the opportunity for everyone to speak up here.
Well, with that, thank you so much.
One last word. Please watch the Supreme Court this month. There's going to be a lot coming down from the U.S. Supreme Court, and I'll just share that it's all interrelated. There are connections and threads to every single issue that we discussed. The governor mentioned the Supreme Court on the gun decision. The Supreme Court is going to issue an abortion decision. It's all related, and I'm grateful to live in a state like New Jersey where there are protections for people, where we have a strong law against discrimination that goes well beyond what the federal laws allow and call for. And I'm grateful to live in a state as diverse and dense as New Jersey is. While we feel the civil rights pains more palpably in here because of our density, we also feel a sense of community more palpably. So I'm grateful to all of you for being here, grateful to the Attorney General and the Governor and the Lieutenant Governor and the Colonel for inviting us for this panel. Thank you so much.
As we leave the stage, please join me and repeat after me. In community, there is unity. Wake up. In community, there is unity. It takes the whole village.
It takes the whole village.
We will do our part.
We will do our part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for the community partners. Thank you all for being here. Would love to give a break, but we're running behind, and we have legislative leaders here, and I know not to keep them waiting any longer than we have to. Really grateful for the community partners, and I would just say to the law enforcement in this room, just real quick, you know, the reason why we bring people together, and law enforcement knows this, and sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable. And that's okay. They should be uncomfortable sometimes. These are tough issues. But when you have those tough conversations, you emerge stronger from it. So I really appreciate all the community leaders being here. I want to just real briefly introduce our three legislative leaders. Chairwoman Linda Greenstein from the Senate Law and Public Safety Committee. Chairman Bill Spearman, please. Chairman Bill Spearman from the Assembly Law and Public Safety Committee, and Assemblywoman Brittany Timberlake, who I would say for all three, there is no greater champions in the state, both on the law enforcement side, and Assemblywoman Timberlake has been a leader on so many issues related to what we're talking about today.
Our department in profound ways and have made the state so much better. She also happens to be my assemblywoman, which is an honor to be here, and of course inherited the seat of the great Lieutenant Governor. So with that, I will also introduce Janae Johnson, my partner in the Governor's Office and the inaugural director of our Office of Diversity and Inclusion.
Words that all of us are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, that we are all connected, that whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And so, to my legislative leaders, I just want us to just consider a bit what we feel in our diverse state, although very diverse, more than half a century has gone past since these words were spoken and these truths were given, and yet we're seeing a rise in our communities of hate and violence. So although our communities are diverse, are also still very silent. We just want to consider what are the factors that are in our state and our nation.
Sure. What are the factors that are leading to, I want to make sure I understand the question. What are the factors that are leading to the racism and the bias and the hatred that we're seeing?
Right, and the rise that we're seeing, the pronounced rise.
Yeah, I think that if it could be pointed to or brought down to a granular level, I would think that it would have to start with the household, right? Because hatred is not a behavior that you're born with. It's something that you're taught. I remember my son, who's now 4 years old, when he was about 1 or 2, it was a Halloween time. We were at Home Depot, and they had a human-sized werewolf. And my son smiled with his little toothless smile and waved to the werewolf, right? Because he thought that it was someone he should say hello to, that he had absolutely zero bias inside of him. And, I realized that it's the bias and hatred that's cultivated in households, which I can relate to, as Amal mentioned his first time with the experience of racism. Unfortunately, mine, although I was born in the later 80s era, you would think that my story was something from the 1960s, as my first time experiencing hatred and bias, unfortunately, was from the womb. As my father chose to marry a beautiful black chocolate father, chose to marry my Caucasian mother, and her family absolutely hated the thought of that. So, having a glimpse into the root of racism from that level, being a military family, traveling all over the globe, and having an experience with different ethnicities and religion, culture, and sexuality, and understanding that, still coming back home to her side of the family, where that was not welcome, and watching my mother protest the Klan when we were they came through Hope Mills, North Carolina in the 90s, and my mother organized a peaceful protest by flipping through the phone book and calling every single church and NAACP she could think of. Remember the phone book? Kids, that was the big book that was killing a lot of trees back in the day, or something delivered to houses. And she protested the Klan, and I watched them yell things at her. She stood there with her black which is what made me actually want to get into public service. So I have to say, if we don't address it from the issue at home base, then it's not going to be better. And then, of course, we know that there are different systems that perpetuate racism as well, that have cultures and systems, whether or not it's a place of employment or the criminal justice system or whatever it is. Housing, as my family is from Levittown, and the history of Levittown being that you could not own a home if you were black. And that was stated in government deed-restricted documents as it was only for white soldiers who were coming home. So it's no wonder that my family who came from that segment of Pennsylvania had strong feelings of racism because it was rooted there in the community, in the family. And I think that we have to, on all levels, teach our children how to accept everyone. Teach our children that, minorities need to stick together. I love seeing this diverse label that was on the previous panel. We have not to, as minorities, stop totem-polling one another. This one is better than that one, and and everybody is better than the Black American, which I'm a Black woman. I mentioned my mother is Caucasian. But, we have to stick together as minorities and support the cause and combine political power, financial power, and go after rights together. That was also part of what Dr. King spoke that you began with, and part of the brilliance was that it was a collaboration of so many different ethnicities that came together for a cause. And as that cause was successful in the time, and there's still more work to do, all minorities were able to benefit from that.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here today. I would have to say, if I had to pick out two of the major things that are going on right now that are making discrimination and anger and hatred worse than it's ever been, it's been pretty bad for a long time. First of all, I think it has to be online social media, and the fact that so many things that used to be that have to be communicated one-to-one are now communicated online. It's so much easier, and I just think that's one of the major causes of how this is spread like wildfire. The other thing, frankly, is our national politics. The fact that there are people, I won't mention names, but there are people who've been willing to bring all of these things out. I always say that right under the surface, we've had all of these white supremacists or whatever, but it was thought of as such a different kind of thing, so unaccepted, that they just kept quiet. But all it took was the president and many others in the country to bring them out behind it, and now we're out. And while there are probably not as many of them as there are of us, it doesn't take that many. And I think that's the reason why we have such tremendous problems in the country right now. I spent a couple of years working for the Anti-Defamation League in New York, and I was working for the department that was actually the heartbeat, kind of an unknown department anyway. It was kind of the heartbeat of the Anti-Defamation League. The person I was working for, who's now long deceased, was the person who did what was called intelligence gathering. And it was intelligence on these right-wing groups. And I actually got to meet people who were members. They went undercover, and then they would come into our offices to debrief. So I met many of these people, and I got to talk to them and see what was going on with them, what motivated them. The frightening thing is, when you were just talking to them one-to-one, they seem like regular people. You didn't necessarily see all the hatred, but when they march, it seems to bring it out. So I think now that those people are out, we need to do everything, use every tool in our arsenal. As everybody said, education is clearly important, but it's absolutely not enough. You have to get kids when they're young and explain these things to them. That will help, but I don't think it will completely solve the problem. We need to educate adults too, long out of school, that they learn you talked about and others. I've been a member of Muslim Jewish coalitions. I was an attendee of the Shalom, which is Jewish and Muslim women who form strong bonds, and many other groups over the years. And I think that the more you're together in these various types of groups to discuss problems and issues, it cements the strength that those groups have. And you're certainly not going to bring the right phrases into that group. But the people like us out here, most of us certainly out here in the audience, will feel much more strength and a sense of unity. So I think all of those things are important. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
March, we can collaborate, we can sit at one another's dinner tables, but as long as there are things that we see highlighted is when we're looking at redlining, we're looking at history of racial restrictive covenants, or we're looking at our policing issues, that the folks on the ground are often informing and helping us to better understand where we need to, or what we need to address. And so I think as we're looking at legislative solutions, some of them were mentioned already. Many of you are sponsoring solutions that will address many of these issues. So I'm experiment, where do you feel the legislature, what are legislative solutions that are part of this answer?
Well, again, I'm going to kind of drill down and go to the root causes of some of the racial problems that we have. And many times, the problems are economic, where you have communities that do not feel that they have the same opportunities as other communities. They feel, I think, some of the chants you hear from some of the radical people who hate in America is, you can't replace us. And I think one of the things that I've always heard as far as economic opportunities is I have one bill called incentivize businesses to work with our community colleges to provide training programs. And then when the people graduate from the training programs, they will hire the entire class of graduates. Those type of things help, I think, to address economic problems that we face. And I think there's other things we need to do also. But I think when it comes to, and I want to go to some of the hate crimes that we involved where we have students who have issues with their classmates and have gone out and gotten AR-15 and decided to kill them to solve their problems. And that goes to the mental health stresses that a lot of our kids are feeling. And I think we have to address that issue too. COVID has been really hard for our kids, and many of these kids are having a hard time adjusting. So I know our colleague Pam Lambert has a bill I think we just approved in the Assembly, which requires that high school counselors be able to refer kids who are having mental challenges to other professionals to get them help before they go out and buy an AR-15 and decide to kill them. So I think those are two issues we can address, talking specifically about our kids, helping people have economic opportunity, and helping kids to find, and helping kids to be able to get mental assistance before for kids who are experiencing bullying or other issues, before they snap and hurt our communities.
Over the years, I've been in the legislature for 21 years, and over the years, we've had different issues that have come to the fore, and I guess things get sort of fixed, and then you don't hear as much about it. But just as an example, on the housing issue, I remember when there was hearings on redlining many years ago, and while there probably still are some problems with that, I'm sure that the legislation we passed helped. We've also done a lot on police issues. I had a hearing in July of 2020. It was about a 7-hour hearing where just about everybody from every side of the issue was there. Superintendent Callahan was there, and many, many others. And we learned about the issues. It was a great learning experience, and a lot of legislation came out of it. Diversity on the police forces, various anti-discrimination things. And we're just in the process now of doing a police licensing bill. Attorney General, thank you for your help with that. And I think that bill is going to be very important because while licensing seems like, first of all, we're one of the only states that doesn't have licensing, but it will include looking at police officers, a very tiny number who actually may need to be put out of the force or whatever. This process will allow that to happen. So it will be very helpful in terms of dealing with any problem people who might be on the force, even though 99% of them are doing a great job. But we need to deal with that small number. Bullying, we had a lot of legislation on bullying one year. So over the years, we have attacked many of these issues that you've heard about today. We've done legislation on, there are some things you can't
hosted by the county, carried out by the sheriff officer. So we've been working with them on processes. But it would help a person or their next of kin be able to purchase that property back at the starting bid, which often is pennies on the dollar, that the investors are able to buy that house for pennies on the dollar, or for whatever reason the banks don't offer principal rate reductions, which would be pennies on the dollar to the homeowner while they're doing the process of trying to save their home during the bureaucratic process. By the time it gets to sheriff's sale, it's usually too late. So this would kind of open up a path for people or their next of kin to save their family wealth. And also, if next in line, we're doing our organizations looking to create permanent affordable housing out of outlets, and then third in line would be people who are interested in purchasing to live in the community, not just owning properties with the LLC and absentee landlords and whatnot. But I agree with both of the panelists, and Senator Spearman had mentioned, that it's about opening up economic access, and that's what that does. But I will say that in my district, I happen to represent one of the blackest districts in the state. I think it is the according to the census. And for some people, we also call the most progressive. So what I'm getting ready to tell you is a little bit shocking, and I'm sure AAPI Montclair would be able to say, yeah, that happens. It's East Orange lives in Montclair. So in some parts of the district, they sell at festivals toy AK-47s next to Trump flags next to the Confederate flag, which, by the way, again, as a child of a protesting plan, I was there. The Confederate flag should be illegal. You should do what Germany did with the swastika. It should not be allowed to be in the United States. It should be done. It is a symbol of hatred, and they lost. They got it. But that's in one part of the district. You can go to the street fair. This is what you see. And in another part of the district, I get calls from the school system because children being targeted, people writing the N-word on the back of their chairs or drawing swastikas, teachers not feeling that they are able to have fair treatment. And this is in one of the most progressive towns that I represent. Or students and parents of students within that school system who feel that their child has been marginalized, not even tested for AP classes, who give them an opportunity, but automatically assume you should go to this regular class because your skin is black. So we have issues here in the state of New Jersey. They didn't just pop up with Donald Trump, although I did file the day of his election for the reason that I knew would be that he would kind of, how they say, don't disturb the bottom of the lake, because then all of a sudden all the stuff starts coming out. I knew that that's what it would be, muddying the waters and reawakening. But the truth of the matter is racism was never really completely asleep. It's always been here amongst us. Again, it's just this systemic, and we need to legislate and figure out how to attack those issues. So usually when you see my name on a piece of legislation, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time, it's to address that at its core issue of reversing the systemic issues. And I know that we're running out of time, so I just want to say thank you so much to the General. Isn't that a cool title, the General? He used to be called the General, like for the rest of his life, right? And that's so, I'm not into titles and stuff, but that's pretty cool, So, I want to thank the General, and of course the Governor and the Lieutenant Governor, Sheila Oliver here, as well as our leadership of the police, Mr. Callahan, and everyone else. And of course, Rutgers, one of my closest friends, my sister friend, is here. We also got our start doing community work, serving on the Montclair and police and Pete. We've been friends ever since. And Shantae Palmer, thank you for also helping to put this together. And all of my advocates who make the legislation possible, because if it's not for people power, we don't get it done. I don't win at big political tables. I win when I drag big political people down to the grassroots level, and we tell them exactly why we need this policy and this law, and because of organizations like POP and ACLU equality that we're able to do that. So thank you so much for helping to be a soundboard and amplify also the sound that's needed for people who are marginalized. As we come to our final round of questions, I just want to thank the administration, the governor, Attorney General Atkins for their support of our office, the Office of Equity, and the governor's office. We look forward to partnering with you all as we look to increasingly add folks to the table. I think part of where we find some of our tension is that people feel that in order to subtract folks, we're going to add. And actually, the table is big enough for all of us. And so we're excited about adding and bringing in folks who have been marginalized, historically underrepresented groups into our decision making and our administration. So we're really excited for that and looking forward to working with you all. Part of that work is the Wealth Disparity Task Force, which I think is something that experiments point, looking at our race-based and ethnic-based disparities in our state. They are striking, they're staggering. The pandemic has exacerbated those. And so our Attorney General is leading our criminal justice working group, is looking at how some of our really structural issues within our criminal justice system are increasing and exacerbating those disparities. And so looking forward to partnering with you. We have 4 other working groups, the housing, education, and health, and the economy that are focused particularly on those from the administration, from our cabinet, who are leading that, Lieutenant Governor is leading that effort as well, so we appreciate that work. I have been, I too am a military child and sports as well, and so PTI, there's that party shop that we all have, and so I think schoolwomen's really kind of gave hers, but gave schoolwomen's experiment, and we're deciding to give opportunity and have a party shop in ways that we can help support the efforts and work that you're doing.
Well, 2 things that I have to mention. It just seems like, unfortunately, new groups keep joining this group of people who have issues. We always all have issues, I guess. But one group that I think had been left out, I don't know if you heard in the last panel, was the AAPI group. And this year, I co-sponsored a bill with Senator Gopal that established the Asian American Pacific Islander Commission within the Department of State. And the commission is charged with developing policies to address social and economic needs of the growing AAPI communities. It seems like problems began to surface during this time with those communities, and so we felt like we ought to have a commission in place to deal with it. So I'm not positive how far the commission has gotten yet, but certainly it's great to have them there to work on the issues. The other community, I've worked on issues for many communities, but another community that I think I've done a lot with is the LGBTQ plus community over the years, having been in the legislature for as many years as I have. In the beginning, for example, it was called civil unions. Nobody felt we could go further than that. And I was proud at that time to run the hearing on civil unions. It was a lengthy one. I run a lot of lengthy hearings. That one was lengthy. And of course, we did pass it. And then later, we were able through the courts and the legislature to get marriage rights. And I'm hoping that we continue to progress in any way I can help the community. I would really like to do it. So issues surface for all the communities, and we all, the important thing is we all have to stand up together to help other communities, as you heard Dr. Choker say. We have to stand up not just for our own group, but for the other as well, so that we have a great coalition of people to do it. And thank you, General, for having us here today.
So let's not forget those who have been in prison and who are coming back into society. They need our help. We need to make sure they have a chance to be successful. Thank you.
So yes, I was in Buffalo. I was in Buffalo just a few hours after the tragic incident. I was there for 3 days, and I would say one thing that stood out incredibly, besides the pain and me being there to show solidarity, was the incredible outpouring of diverse people who came to say how sorry they were, who came to offer their help. This is the role that a diverse community can play. It's why we, as APL, we celebrate diversity. It's why when the organization was founded in 1913, it was founded to fight hate. Unfortunately, a mission that continues to this day, but it was founded as a Jewish organization that works to fight all forms of hate, not just anti-Semitism. It's so critical. And it was very important to listen to our legislative leaders talk about what they can do, but at the end of the day, legislation are guardrails. Very important guardrails, but guardrails nonetheless. If we want to get rid of hate, it's civil society. It's civil society that plays that role, and our faith leaders were so critical in that battle to fight hate, which is why I'm so honored to be with this group of faith leaders and to hear from them not only about what they're encountering, but how we can fight hate. So I'm going to start by doing a very quick round and ask each of them, what one thing, just one thing, are you most concerned about? So let's go down the line.
Well, it's going to come a passport, say only one thing every time.
When it comes to hate,
I believe it's education. It's education. We have to educate our community.
I would say the overall political atmosphere of hate, bias, and the impact that can have over the state and country.
I think the biggest concern that we have is for the conscience of the human being. The root of racism, the root of bias, the root of bigotry is something that we have to examine and how that affects the psychology or the soul of the individual. Yes, we have bodies, we have minds, but the essence of the human being is the spirit. And we have to understand how racism, how hatred, how bigotry affects the soul of the human being.
I think it was a presentation of one's being, who he is, what he represents, and his generally spirit of life. And often we leave you just because what you see just from you. So I think this representation of one's identity or one's faith is the biggest obstacle that we feel that is in
I would agree with my colleagues, just add that for my understanding experience that the root of much of our bias, hate, and violence is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of others, fear of differences. That is a big problem in our society.
I'm going to play off of that a little bit. So fear is what you see as the biggest driver. Reverend Green, what do you see as the biggest driver of hate in our society?
Absolutely, fear is a part of that, and the manipulation of fear. And we've seen that throughout history. Actually, I invite everybody to really look at the CNN special on the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre and how the manipulation of fear from the media, the Tulsa Tribune, and what the impact the Tulsa Tribune had on the massacre. The issue of employment and who was employed and who wasn't employed, who had land, black people had land, and white people did not have land, and the jealousy that happened back then, and it all of a sudden turned into, don't forget, the Bin Laden, that there was a supposed rape, and then you had an entire community destroyed. Please look at that. And I see the same thing happening today, the manipulation of fear.
Let's get even more practical. From your community members or what do you hear? What do you hear that is making them scared in terms of this atmosphere of hate?
So I represent the New Jersey Coalition of Pastors and Ministers. We have 400 churches in the state of New Jersey, more than 52,000 converts. And what you see is from the past administration, from the Trump administration, all these messages that
President Trump delivered to the media. So they fear to go to the hospital, they fear to apply for a job, they fear to walk in the street. And you see this 28 cases in the state of New Jersey this year, Latino community crimes, so they're scared. And I say it's about education. We have to educate our community about where they can go when they feel in this type of feeling. I say education because we have to teach our community that we are the same. You know, very me because we are the same. It's about the education. It's a lot of challenge for the Hispanic community because it's the English, it's the language factors, it's the resource factors. So it's a lot to do. And I'm so proud and we give a shout out to our prosecutors, that's why we create this type of forum in our community to our attorney general because this is important. Educate our community, this is important. That's what we need to change the mind, to change how people think. So I believe that's the part.
Imam Sharif, what's your community scared of?
I think the thing that we have to be most concerned about is something that Lieutenant Governor Sherlock pointed out earlier today, and that is the ignorance that ultimately leads people to do things that ultimately will threaten the lives of other human beings. We have to address the root of what is causing this bias, the root of what is causing racism, the root of what is causing bigotry. And until we get to that root, I have a friend of mine who actually grew up in the South, and my parents are from the South, and they told me about this plant called nutgrass. It's called nutgrass, and when nutgrass is in a field, it's very difficult for you to grow other crops. And you have to get to the nutgrass. You have to remove all of the nutgrass, including the root, in order to solve the problem that is associated with removing the disease. Well, the disease of racism, the disease of bias, the disease of bigotry is something that goes back to, and I don't want to offend anyone, but it must be said, it goes back to some imagery that was put forward by the faith community itself. When we start to connect one race to divinity, and we remove other races from that connection, then you are automatically setting up a position of superiority and inferiority. This problem and this challenge has to be addressed because it affects the psychology of those who can relate to that divine image, and it affects the psychology of those who cannot relate to that divine image, giving one a false sense of superiority and giving another a false sense of inferiority.
Mr. Singh, tell us in terms of your community, what do you fear the most?
Let me start with how I feel when I wake up and go on my job. Well, I'm attorney. I know how to call names. And I don't mind somebody call me who I'm not. But I always feel the hate and bigotry behind it. And the perpetrator, what's his thinking processes. And I always try to reach out and tell him, it doesn't matter what you call me or what you perceive I am. Hate or BS is bad for you and for our society. I grew up in India where there's a different kind of racism there. It's caste-based. And I still remember as a kid growing up in my high school, when my teacher would come in the first of every month and tell, please stand up, all the lower classes, lower caste people, and your monthly fees will be forgiven. It's not fees, it's humiliation that they face every festival because they belong to a particular caste. I feel that. When I moved here, I thought getting out of that juggernaut society, I'm moving to a free society. I raised my family in a very diverse city. And I was surprised that my son told me, he's in college now, he told me that he was bullied when he was in elementary school. Just because his turban was because of his hair. And he didn't tell me 10 years, until 10 years later when he was in college. So we, as a community, whenever I go to an office, there's some eyebrows raised until I start talking in English and telling who I am in case they ask me to. Generally, they hold, this is, I think it's part of which Dr. Sharif says about our mental stage, how we think, how we perceive others, and how we take others who we're not used to. So, it's a great effort from the side of the administration, especially Governor Shilawar and Governor Murphy, to focus on diversity and inclusion. Because by nature we are diverse. Diversity is natural, and we have to accept that fact.
Thank you. Pastor Ron, tell us about the role of the faith leader in combating hate.
Sure, as a faith leader, I believe that it's important to lead by example. And part of that is to overcome fear, which is fueled by ignorance, through ourselves leading by example of having this dialogue and opportunity to learn from one another. I really appreciate the stories that you've shared. I appreciate the knowledge and the wisdom that you give, but we ourselves have to learn. I just, myself, one of my fears is that we will fulfill what Dr. Martin Luther King said, that Sunday morning at 11 a.m. is the most segregated hour of the week, where we choose to be with people just like ourselves. When there is a plethora of wisdom, plethora of experience, plethora of knowledge that we can gain from one another, to share our stories, to share our experience, to overcome and combat prejudice and bias. This is not just an American problem. It's not just an Indian problem. It's not an Asian problem. It's not an African problem. It's a worldwide problem. Because there's prejudice and selfishness in each and every single people group, and sadly, in each and every one of us. The way we overcome that is by developing these genuine relationships with other people, and I appreciate that.
We heard about your prayer group earlier, and I know you have a very significant in your faith group. Tell us your view of the role of faith leaders in combating hate.
First of all, I think that silence is deafening. People don't speak up. Those that promote hate will speak louder. So in the interfaith action movement, we speak up against hate. We had people last month before Buffalo to give us a briefing on hate in New Jersey, and we offered that opportunity to the entire state. I think we have a huge role to play as it relates to faith in creating infrastructure. In the Interfaith Action Movement, we meet every day, right? We meet every day, 8 o'clock, 7 days per week. 7 days per week. Why? Because those folks that promote hate and bias and violence, they don't stop either. So we're not going to stop. We're not going to stop creating an opportunity for people to come on, to work together, to talk about problems, to talk through issues, and to address problems. Our mission is to address the spiritual, social, and economic needs of underserved and marginalized communities throughout the state, nation, and globe. And I say it every day, we're doing just that. I believe in the Charles Hamilton Houston philosophy, the great Howard University professor. And he talked about making ambassadors of love. I believe that we can do that teaching young people, giving people the tools to be those ambassadors. Because the more ambassadors we have, we can defeat hate, and I believe that we can defeat hate.
Reverend Flores, with hundreds of pastors and ministers that you work with, tell us your view on the role of faith leaders play in fighting hate.
When you look at all the Old Testament, you see the hate from Torah, jealousy, separation. It's a lot of belief. Everybody believes in something. It's a lot of religion. I believe that we have to work together, and we have to come together with the same issue. All the holy scriptures talk about love. So let's talk about love. Let's act where we believe. It's no matter what you believe. You can believe in Muhammad, you can believe in Jesus, you can believe in whatever you want to believe. The divine, the high power, the Lord. But let's come together with the same issue, love. You don't have to repeat to me, the word from the Bible. I don't want that. I want you to show me that you care for me. I want you to give me a place or say to me, Reverend, do you have a place to sleep? This is a church right here. Bring me resort. Bring me something. The action. I'm not even let's make sure I don't repeat too much the word from the Bible. I think that. That's what I think.
So a lot of what we've heard is about being a role model for fighting hate. But I'm sure I want to ask you, not so much what a faith leader can do, but what the rank and file can do. What can your members do to fight hate?
I think the congregations that play probably the most important role in terms of transforming the society. And we, those of us who proclaim to be part of a faith community, we have to know the components of that faith. If we don't know the principles of the faith, then how can we adequately represent what it is we profess to believe in? As a member of the Muslim community, it's my responsibility to know what God says in the book that I read, the Quran. And I have to represent that not just in a verbal expression, I have to represent that in how I conduct my behavior with other human beings. The same thing is true. The reason why Islam doesn't have priests is because every human being has a connection to God that doesn't require us to go through somebody else. So therefore, that human being has a responsibility. If you know one word from Almighty God, you have a responsibility to pass that word on to somebody else. You have a responsibility to bring the level of consciousness that someone has about their duty and their obligation to God and human society, to bring that consciousness to other people. The congregations play a bigger role than even the leadership does, because the leadership depends upon the congregation in order for the leadership to even be there. And the leadership has to be educated. The tool that is going to be the most transformative thing for the eradication of bias, racism, bigotry within the state of New Jersey, within the United States of America, and the globe, is going to be the transformation of information, the transformation of knowledge, how people learn how to understand their connection to other human beings, and how they understand that when God created me, He created me with a human soul. The same human soul that you have. The same human soul that a white person has, a black person has, a Hispanic person has. Any human being has only one type of soul, and that is a human soul. When we can connect to that, then we can connect to the essence of what is this human family that we all belong to, and we can begin to start treating each other as brothers and sisters in the same family.
Thank you. And I think we've heard a lot about education being the solution. In your case, you spoke about your community educating themselves, but there are other ways to educate in terms of in the schools. There's a lot of anti-bias and celebrate diversity. I'll leave that to whoever wants to go first.
Well, I'm going to go first. So I'm so grateful to Senator Lester Ruiz and the entire Latino caucus. Right now I submit a draft, and I recommend that for the 6th grade to 7th grade to teach about history for our country. It's important people have to know where I come from, why I'm here. You know, when you look at the curriculum right now, the education is focusing on it. It's so important. You know, not everyone is so important. You have to learn about the country. You have to learn about the history. So you can understand that people, where the people come from, why the people act like this, why the people dress like this, you know, why the people believe in that. It's important that you have to learn. And I think so it has to start at the school. This is so important. Also, we passed a legislation resolution with Senator Lester Ruiz that we select the 2nd Saturday of October as the Latino priority. What do we do with that is that we create campaigns talk about why our belief, why our faith, and people can educate more about the faith. Why we believe in that.
Anybody else in the role of education?
Yeah, I guess education is key to dispel the hate and fear and fears, especially from all different communities and cultures, obviously faiths. One of the things which we understood all the years is that kids are not taught at an early age how to deal with other communities, other peoples who doesn't look like them, how to respect them, how to respect their needs. We're going to have a long road to cover. So, obviously, we do have our own community schools where we teach our kids how to follow the principles of your own faiths, as well as how to respect others and respect, follow human beings. I guess to institute the curriculum which pretty much teach them at an early age in the schools about other faiths and cultures, being a university as New Jersey is now, it's obvious that we need to focus on that. Our kids, especially kids from like my faith, stand up and they are hard. So they don't have to face that bigotry or hate that we face in just being different.
I think we have to broaden our view of education. Unfortunately, I think education today, what it translates into is how can I make more money? And I think that creates a problem for the minds and the hearts of those individuals who are striving to be not just better industrial people, but better human beings. We have to expand the scope of education within the system so that education begins to evolve the consciousness about morals, ethics, those things that ultimately we know are affecting the health of our society right now. We have people in leadership positions within this country who represent the lowest morals, the lowest standard of ethics, and the lowest standard of a human being that should not be representing the kind of leadership that we want our children to duplicate within the citizenship of this country. We have to begin to change how people think not only about what they have, but change what they think about who they are. And what does it mean for me when I say that I'm a human being? My identification goes beyond the color of my skin. The essence of who I am is my humanity. That's the essence of who I am. And we have to stop having people just look at the surface of another person and identifying that person on the basis of their skin color, their ethnicity, or the way they speak. We have to begin to look deeper into what does it mean to be a human being, and how can I relate to you as a human being so that we can make our society
tangible example of education in my war. I taught African history at Washington University. And I had a student named Brandon, who was a white male. He took my class, and I think he just took the class because he graduated. And he came into the class with certain ideas. One, he didn't believe that there was systemic oppression. He did not believe that there was anything called white privilege or privilege. He did not believe it. And we began to discuss. This is why education is so important. When they're doing it all over to the governor and banning certain teachings on critical race theory, on LGBTQ community, and all of it is wrong, and it stifles human growth when you don't know about the next person in your career. This young man, Brandon, took a class, and at the end, the required trip was the Baltimore Blacks Museum. And he went and saw the lynching exhibit and the slave ship exhibit. And Brandon began to cry. It touched me. And so did I. So it was a big crying session. Brandon said to me, Professor Green, I didn't know. And now he knows. You see Brad on Facebook now? He's just changed. He's progressive, and he's raising his family now. But that's what he needs education. And anybody who does not want their children or themselves to be educated on their own history, because my history is your history, and your history is my history. We have one history together, and we must know each other so that we can respect each other and move forward together.
I want to give you the last word. Any thoughts on how we solve it? No, Pastor John.
I would say that today we've heard a lot of great words, and there's been a lot of transformative information shared. I just want to quote, which is the kingdom of God is not a matter of words, but of power, of transformative power. And you have heard a lot of great information today. The question is, what will you do with that information? Will it stay just as a thought? Will it be just a matter of discussion? Or will it bring about change in your workplaces? I'm so glad we have sergeants and lieutenants and captains and colonels and generals and community leaders and senators and legislative leaders here. When you hear a racist joke at work, when you hear a gay joke at work, what do? You just kind of ignore it and hope it goes away? Or do you look for an opportunity to pair them up with someone to work with, to develop that relationship, to have the transformative opportunity to practice what we are saying? We don't want to just talk about bias and prejudice. We want to walk the walk. We want to live that power that can bring change in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces, in our great state of New Jersey. Thank you.
Civil society plays the traditional role that civil society plays in fighting hate. That's exactly what civil society does. It pushes hate to the margins. It says this is not acceptable, and it pushes it so far that it doesn't manifest itself in society. This is what faith leaders can do. This is what all of you as leaders can do. And I thank you so much for your attention.
All right. I know everybody thinks we're out of time. I'm going to ask for 10 to 15 more minutes. We moved our department presentations. They're going to be very brief, I promise you. But it's important that you all hear the work that they're doing. Again, it's going to be less than 15 minutes. But I want to introduce Shirley Evangelou, who's the Executive Assistant Attorney General. She's going to speak briefly about social media and gun violence. Promenado, our Director Chief of Strategic Initiatives and Enforcement at our Division on Civil Rights, will speak about our law against discrimination. Thank you again for being here. Thanks.
Thank you, General. Good afternoon. I'm honored to speak to you about the incredible work that's being done by the women and men of the Department of Law and Public Safety, specifically Division of Consumer Affairs. The rise in violence crimes is an affront to all of us who value the rich diversity of our state. It's an affront to all of us who believe that everyone deserves to live without fear of being targeted because of their race, religion, or sexual orientation. We are here today because we recognize our shared humanity, our shared responsibility to do everything we can to ensure that New Jersey residents can live without fear. Without fear of going to school, without fear of going to worship, without fear of going to pick up groceries. The Division of Consumer Affairs is proud to be working with our fearless leader, General Platten, under leadership of Governor Murphy, Lieutenant Governor Walker, and in partnership with Colonel Callahan and other law enforcement officials. And the division is using every tool that we have to help stop the spread of hate, prevent acts of violence, and hold accountable those whose actions perpetuate bias crimes. We've heard repeatedly today, it's not just about words, it's about actions. But what are we doing? Well, we are using the far-reaching and powerful Consumer Fraud Act, or CFA. Make no mistake, the CFA is a precision tool, key to protecting each and every one of us in our daily lives. The CFA allows us to bring civil actions against individuals and businesses in New Jersey and elsewhere for unlawful conduct that harms New Jersey residents. We have used the CFA to combat violent bias crimes in two ways. First, by targeting the amplification of hate on social media that fuels these heinous attacks. Second, by putting a stop to the sale of illegal guns being used to carry out these heinous crimes. Let's talk first about social media. The days following the tragic mass shooting in Buffalo, the Division of Consumer Affairs launched an investigation into the anti-hate policies of two social media platforms. As you know, the Buffalo massacre was not conducted under the cover of night. It was in broad daylight and live streamed on social media. Imagine that. Victimization and re-victimization of those who lost their lives and their loved ones on public display for social media. So these platforms, which were used to reportedly plan and publicize this racially motivated attack, have, as we know, an enormous reach, especially with our young people who are consumed. If you look at them, they're always on their phones, right? They're consumed by social media. And so our investigation of these social media platforms seeks to determine if they are violating the CFA by failing to enforce their very own content moderation policies. Are they just talking the talk, or are they walking the walk? So if the platforms, on the one hand, claim that they proactively moderate or prohibit violent extremism and hate, but on the other hand, let it flourish unchecked, that is unlawful. If we find out that they're engaging in this unlawful conduct, we will hold them accountable. Now, the CFA is not the only weapon in our campaign against gun violence. It's also being used in another context, gun violence. And here we see the intertwining of social media and gun violence, but we've used the CFA to go after state gun manufacturers and dealers for marketing and selling illegal firearm products in New Jersey. This includes untraceable ghost guns, high-capacity magazines being sold online to New Jersey residents. These civil actions have resulted in settlements and judgments requiring these dealers to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, and more importantly, requiring them to stop selling these dangerous illegal weapons in We are stronger when we work together towards a shared goal of bringing an end to violence and hate that threatens our residents, promotes fear in our communities, and undermines New Jersey's commitment to diversity and inclusion. So by coming together today with a clear message that hatred and bigotry will not be tolerated anywhere in our state. Thank you. Good afternoon, all. It's such an honor for me to speak on a subject matter that's obviously so incredibly important to us. We mentioned the Buffalo shooting and thereafter the noticeable increase nationwide in bias crimes. Therefore, we are here, Acting Attorney General and myself, to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to combat bias through progressive tools, to root out, prosecute, and most importantly, to prevent future crimes that's motivated by hate. So our office's approach is multifaceted. I just want to give you a little bit of a taste of the real work that we're doing here. The first prong of that approach targets education. It is absolutely imperative that we give the necessary tools to our kids and their families so that they can recognize bias, they can refuse to tolerate it, and that they can report it effectively to the police. So for example, just recently, DCJB acquired a $750,000 federal grant for an advertising campaign that specifically focuses on warning our grade school kids and their parents about hate, something that's not really been done before, particularly online hate, because we all know that our children are particularly vulnerable to that. And the Division of Criminal Justice, we're working very closely with the Division of Civil Rights on this, and we're hoping to actually roll this out this upcoming school year in the fall, and it's going to be everywhere. I am talking about physical ads on school buses to virtual ads on a multitude of social media platforms, and again, the goal is to encourage and incite meaningful discussion amongst our communities, our children, their parents, so that when they see it, they experience it, they're more apt to talk about it, which has not been done historically, and therefore hopefully more apt to report it. The second prong of that approach goes to outreach, right? Acting Attorney General in our office, we will continue to reach out to the communities, and we recognize, everyone's spoken here from the communities, the stakeholders, there are communities who are going to be resistant or uncomfortable in engaging law enforcement, and we are committed to continue to train and educate our great law enforcement about the wonderful diversity of this state so that all our communities can continue to foster positive, I mean really working on this, to foster positive relationships and to develop trust with our wonderful law enforcement forces on the ground. And this effort isn't just talk. It actually includes real examples, ranging from requiring our personnel in law enforcement agencies to actually reflect the diversity in the communities that they actually serve, to requiring that there are online translation instructions for even reporting a crime, let alone a bias crime. And this is really important because we're talking about 12 different languages that this is happening in. And that is extremely important to citizens, particularly those who obviously don't speak English or it's not their first language, for them to actually engage in the process, a process that we all know here can be incredibly daunting and frightening for a lot of our citizens. So we want them to do it, but with less fear. Then, a lot of prosecutors here, prosecution. Once a biased crime is reported, we're going
investigate and prosecute the offender. With all the cameras represented here, we all know that many states have their bias statutes that enhances the sentence. New Jersey has some of the strongest bias intimidation law in the country. We know that we actually have the option, right, of charging a separate offense under our laws in addition to any underlying offense. And that offense is actually 1 degree higher than the underlying offense. So if we've got a scenario where a defendant's charged and they normally would not be looking at a state prison sentence, all of a sudden, if they're motivated by hate or bias, this person now is realistically looking at a potential state prison sentence. The point is, this is an incredible tool that our state has, and we use it. The last thing I want to talk about, because I'm certainly cognizant of the time constraints, is, with all the law enforcement represented here, ERCOs, extreme risk protective orders. This is one of the most effective tools that we can implement. Not only can this be applied for by our law enforcement, it can be done so by the public, family members, and for what purpose? To have a gun removed from an individual who's determined to be unfit to possess that weapon if we show that the individual has a potential showing causing bodily harm to either himself or another individual. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something that not only is a tool that has been on the books since 2019, but it's actually being used and it should be continued to be used. Very brief piece of information. Since the inception of this law through January of this year, 835 temporary orders have been issued. That's incredible. And about 396 final orders have been issued. I will end by simply stating that, along with people like yourselves, our law enforcement partners, as well as the non-law enforcement partners, the Office of the Attorney General and the Division of Criminal Justice will remain at the forefront of the prevention and prosecution of these incidents. And we will be committed to continue to protect our communities on this front. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank the Attorney General for hosting this summit today. njdcj.org, or go into the DC article, and it's the Digital Civil Rights Code, and just look for the bias total for reporting. And just let me emphasize once again today how important this conference is. And I'm going to steal a line from Colonel Callahan's. You should have copyrighted it. It's important that we meet on blue sky days, because it's too late when we have a catastrophe. Thank you.
DCR's mission, for those who do not know, is to prevent, eliminate, and remove discrimination and bias-based harassment in employment, housing, and places open to the public, places of public accommodation, which are places that include schools, healthcare facilities, pharmacies, restaurants, jails, prisons, and even police conduct, all places open to the public. DCR is specifically tasked to enforce three important laws that impact the majority of our state and everyone in this building. That is the law against discrimination, known as the OAG, the Family Leave Act, which is the FLA, and the newly enacted Fair Chance and Housing Act, that's PHA, to the landmark housing bill that was signed into law on June 2, 2021. The LED serves to protect us, everyone here in New Jersey, based upon over 27 protected categories. I will not name them all. But they include race, gender identity and expression, religion, national origin, disability, marital status, pregnancy, breastfeeding and chest feeding, liability for military service, source of wealth income, and many, many more. For those who may not know, New Jersey's law against discrimination is one of the oldest and most expansive anti-discrimination laws in the nation. Our state law protects us more than federal law. New Jersey should be proud to be leaders in anti-discrimination legislation and policies. But I stand here today not to only laud the work that leaders have done for generations, but bring attention to what you're all here for, to the work that still needs to be done. So DCR, in collaboration with the New Jersey State Police, issued bias incident reports analyzing reported bias incidents, emphasis on the word reported bias incidents for the years of 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. As part of Governor Murphy's interagency task force to combat bias, we issued another report in 2020 focused exclusively on the incredible rise amongst our youth, and that includes bullying, harassment, and hate. And our 2020 report documented that 2020 now marks the highest annual number of reported bias incidents in our state since the state began reporting bias incidents in 1994. We attribute the upward trend this year to the COVID-19 pandemic, racist backlash against Black Lives Matter protests, and the 2020 presidential election. If you haven't read these reports, I encourage you to do so. They detail the categories of people who are targeted and victimized, which is predominantly Black folks and Black communities. We also detail the offenders and largely white men, and we also provide information on counties where bias incidents are on the rise and decline, because it impacts us all, we should all do what's happening around us, and to us, and to our neighbors. So the goal of reporting this data is certainly not to come to New Jersey, not to come and live and enjoy. It's quite the opposite. We can only combat bias, hate, and discrimination if we know about it, if we analyze what is occurring, and develop the strategies, processes, technology, and most importantly, the resources and responses that build trust that ensures people who are reporting so we can actually address it. And that is why I stand here today to implore you, me, you in your own community to report these incidents also, specifically to your division on civil rights. While housed under the Attorney General's office, it is a separate, neutral, non-law enforcement state agency. So for those who may not feel comfortable reporting to law enforcement, you can and should report to DCR. Our vision is to achieve New Jersey free from discrimination rights where all people are treated equally, with dignity, and with respect, and to have equal opportunity. And so while the New Jersey State Police and other prosecutors' offices focus on investigating and prosecuting behaviors as criminal acts, we at DCR enforce our laws with civil penalties and equitable remedies. So DCR finds that stop discrimination and harassment, adoption of new policies and practices, return fees, and more. So, for example, if your child experiences bullying in school based on their gender identity, or you are at work and patrons or use racial slurs that you or your employer knows of this and neglects to act according to the LD, review your landlord attempts to evict you because they affiliate COVID-19 with a national origin. You can report those incidents to PCR, and if you find probable cause, you could obtain money from you, require trainings, require entity to establish a scholarship fund for staff who may have been agreed, require changes in the policies, host human rights trainings, work with community members, and many, many more things even beyond criminal prosecution. And so, the important part still, you can report a violation of the law against discrimination, family impact, or the Fair Chance and Housing Act by going to the TCR website, which is njcivilrights.gov, or what I often have to do really quickly, which is NJPCR. Then go into our online complaint portal, which is intentionally named NJBIAS, or NJBIAS. You can call us at 1-833-NJPCR for you. We have a relay service for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. And of course, because we all have this now, you can follow us on social media by looking us up at Civil Rights NJ. And of course, if you go to our website, you can also find a range of other resources, videos, webinars, civil rights social media posts, fact sheets, guided documents, and more. So please encourage law enforcement included. When someone is coming to you, please still encourage them to report to PCR so you can have a full spectrum of ways that they can handle the licenses that they need.
All right, reached the end. I want to thank my partners in the Department of Law and Public Safety for the work they're doing. That was really just a small taste of it, obviously. I want to thank all of you for being here, the governor, lieutenant governor, almost the entire time. We have gone over. Colonel is still here, Larry for inspiration, Scott, and everybody else who was helpful. I just want to say two things. One, pastors were spot on. We want to look, we weren't going to cure bias and hate in the morning. We're not going to cure it in the morning. That's extended into an early afternoon. We have a lot of work left to do. And what I want you to see is that we're doing it, but we need help. For the community members that are still here, if you have folks that have engaged with either your local, county, or state law enforcement officers or the Division on Civil Rights, please have them do it. Please help us identify them and let us be those partners. And to the law enforcement partners we have here, you know, as you know, I was chief counsel of the governor. Governor in this country, this state, is known as having the strongest constitutional authority of any governor in the country. And there was one day, well, about a year into the time I was there, that I was dealing with something and I just couldn't figure out how to solve it. And there was a long-time advisor to the governor, served many governors, and said, you still don't understand the power of this office. It's not the Constitution, it's your ability to call a meeting. So what we're doing here today is we call a meeting. But you all have that ability in your counties and your jurisdictions. Keep doing that. And keep working with your community partners to figure out how to call these meetings in ways that will be effective. That we're bringing new people to the table who otherwise wouldn't deal with us. Because I can assure you, it will save lives. That shooter in Buffalo put